Welcome back to a special edition of Casey Campbell's Videocast. I'm Casey Campbell from Great Lakes Post. Joining me right now is MHSAA Executive Director Mark Ewell. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Casey.
Well, you just released minutes ago, some guidance for high schools to resume activities based on the governor's stay-at-home order. Originally, that was supposed to be June 12th. But now with these updates, just give us what teams can do right now.
Sure. So of course, we put out our initial guidance, which is a 3-step plan to return to activity last Friday. And the very first hurdle to doing anything was the stay-at-home order. So as Governor Whitmer rescinded the stay-at-home order yesterday, that removed the first hurdle. Now, there are 2 more hurdles yet that school districts have to clear before any activity can take place at a school facility. One is the district actually has to declare their facilities open. We've got some districts that have said to all staff, all students, we are closed through June 30th or through July 5, whatever that is. So a district first has to declare their facilities open. The second thing that has to happen is their academic year has to be over. So the last day of either online classes or online exams has to come to an end, and then that school is able to use their facility. So once those 2 hurdles get cleared, then it's a return to activity. Let's talk about that activity a second. So as of today, if a school district has ended their academic year, so let's say that their online classes or exams ended last week, and that school district has deemed their facilities open, what can happen starting today is that there can be outdoor athletic activity. And that means practices and workouts with no more than 100 students at a time. And of course, we're recommending that number be far fewer than 100. But when it comes to outdoor activity, as long as social distancing is maintained, schools can begin that activity. What's interesting is given the numbers, because we were going to use the numbers of the sizes of groups to determine how you move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Ironically, outdoors, we're actually starting now at step 2. If it's 10 or fewer, that was going to be the step 1 guidance. Well, now that we're not only outdoors, but it's 100 or less, outdoor activity can start with step 2. Indoor activity is at step 0 because nothing right now can happen indoors, not in your gym, not in your weight room, not in your pool, whatever that is. So what we're kind of telling our schools right now is you're really in a modified step 2 to where outdoor activity can begin, have to keep social distancing of 6 feet. So for example, in football, if I'm the football coach and I want to get some kids together, we could throw passes. However, if we take a handoff, we can't do that yet. If I'm going to take a hand-to-hand snap from a center to the quarterback, can't do that yet because you're within 6 feet. Basketball, I can do some outdoor activities. So in my district, it's got to be an outdoor court or an outdoor hoop. So right now we could do shooting drills and passing drills as long as kids aren't closer than 6 feet, but we can't scrimmage or play yet because the first time a defender gets within 6 feet, or I go up, Casey, for a rebound against you right next to me, well then it's the social distancing guidelines. So it does open up the door for some outdoor activity to return for us to get started here in these very early phases.
You talk about the 6 feet being enforced, and how do you think schools, coaches, how is that going to be enforced by coaches, by who is going to be the singular person that is going to be enforcing that?
Well, ultimately, the coach is going to be responsible, or the person supervising that activity. And I can tell you that given that all that we're doing here with COVID is a health and safety issue, that anyone that's not following this, who basically says, we really don't need to do this, heaven forbid we should have a positive case at that school or one of those kids is involved. I'm not sure that a coach's career could survive that. So certainly, and what we're trying to get this message out, Casey, is if you want August and September to look as normal as we possibly can make it, we need to do the right things now and not blow it in the first or second week of June to where it really puts us behind the eight ball come the fall season.
Speaking of that, I think that's probably the biggest question that everybody's really asking. At this point, I was reading through the original guideline with allowing with spectators and all that and stuff. Originally, I think you just limited to, I think, essential personnel, which is obviously teams, coaches, athletic personnel. I think media can be, someone like me can go to a game and cover it.
Yep.
But spectators would not. Does that include parents too?
So spectators would be in that third group. So let's say, for example, Casey, that it was the middle of August right now, and so it's middle of August, and let's say that the participant social distancing restriction has been eliminated, so we actually can play a game of football between the participants. But let's say though that the outdoor limitation is still at 100. In this scenario, each school would be able to admit 50 individuals into the facility. And of course, that list I'm sure would be for parents. And of course, they would need to be outdoors, socially distanced, at least 6 feet in between each person. But that's one scenario, Casey, where again, if we're under, spectators are allowed, but there's a limit on the size of the groups, being outdoors, social distancing, which actually in the throes of March, when we said our tournaments are still going to be on, but with limited numbers of spectators, that list of spectators that each school was working on putting together would kind of be how we would handle that. But again, please, the listeners out there, this is all speculative based on what we know right now. And, I don't know exactly what next week is going to look like, Casey, much less what August and September is. But that's one scenario we've got to be ready for is, yes to outdoor spectators, but in limited numbers. If that's the case, then how do we social distance and make that work?
And by social distancing, you mean within, out of the same household. Parents,
Right.
if you live in the same household, obviously, it's just a little confusing for some people.
Yep.
But I also want to ask you about masks. I know that's the big topic of conversation right now. Obviously, the CDC recommends that, masks should not be worn during athletic competition. If you go to a high school event, or if I go to a high school event, when would we see participants wearing masks?
Well, currently, the requirement of masks in our state, at least the direction from the governor's office, it's when you're in an enclosed area. So currently that's indoors. So you go into Myers or some other store, I shouldn't have probably used the name brand, but oh well. Well, you're required to wear that mask because you're indoors, you're in an enclosed area. Now you're outdoors at a stadium. So for the participants, you're not required to wear a mask. If a student in a workout next week being outdoors chooses to wear the mask, fine. They're not required as long as you keep that social distancing of at least 6 feet, again, if you're outdoors. And that's another reason why I think the governor in easing restrictions has the number at 100 being outdoors is obviously, that chance of spreading the virus when you're outdoors versus indoors is different. But as that relates to what we would require of participants or coaches or officials or spectators when it comes game time, Casey, again, that'll be an August question that we'll need to have an answer for by then.
Yeah. Another thing I kind of wanted to ask you about is, I've heard from a lot of people. Would you be considered with football? The big rumor is that it could be postponed to spring. You could get baseball in the fall or something. Can you address those and say, is that something that you're really looking into?
So for us to change any of our seasons, we would have to go back to the federal court in Kalamazoo. The seasons case that now is over a decade old. One of the results of that is we no longer determine sports seasons. It's determined by the federal court. So any change whatsoever would have to have us going back to, first of all, ask for permission for that. The other thing, Casey, is if we would get into switching seasons. So let's say that we would move spring sports to the fall. And let's say that we have a second spike that hits in early September, or something comes up to where we'd have to shut down, we'd have to quarantine. Well, now if you do that, now your spring kids have just lost out on 2 seasons in a row. So I think, what was prudent over the last month or two is you at least have to talk about these options. The colleges were looking at the same thing, but it appears that all the data, all the guidance, as we look toward the fall, is that we'll be able to have kids on campuses, kids in buildings, which then means school sports can be played. And currently, the plan is that football is going to be played in the fall.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at what, football, soccer, a lot of the benches, areas, kids are tightly packed together. I mean, that's something that we've always noticed. Even if they're tightly packed together, could schools in this, okay, we're tightly packed together. Can a school impose, we have to wear masks? Because obviously they're going to space each other out. Could a school impose that?
Could, absolutely. And what you could see, Casey, is instead of in soccer, all the kids sitting under in the dugout or in the shelter, or even at football, we could do away with the rule that you have to stay between the 25s if it's a large squad, and spread out those kids who currently aren't playing. The one where I actually have the most concerns right now is volleyball in the fall. So now you've got 6 or 7 or 8 young ladies who aren't in the game and they're on the bench. How can we properly spread that out and distance that out being indoors? And of course, that's our only fall sport that's played inside. Now fast forward to the winter. Now what do basketball benches look like? What do wrestling benches look like? All those kinds of things, which again will be bridges that have to be crossed here in the weeks and months ahead. But initially, I actually think the distancing for kids in the game is pretty easy in the fall because we only have the one indoor sport. Where I really have more worry if, again, we're still in kind of this scenario is when we really come to winter where other than downhill skiing in the winter, everything is indoors that way.
Yeah. What I also kind of, want to maybe look at as teams kind of get into, in fall sports, involving when people come into contact with each other, when you have like football, soccer, cross country, there may be outdoor sports, but you can come into contact with somebody there. Is that something that you guys are concerned about?
I think we're concerned about a lot of things right now. And certainly when it comes to football, this is one area where we're going to be able to take the lead of what the professional level is doing and what all the colleges are doing. And when I say the colleges, not just what Michigan and Michigan State are doing, but how about our Division III and NAIA schools in our state? What are they doing to keep those 100 plus kids as safe as possible in those close contact sports? Same way, what are the fall colleges doing in soccer to try and reduce those instances? To again, I don't know if that's mask. I don't know if that's a shield on the helmet. Again, yeah, I do have some concerns about football, but I have a lot more concerns come winter time in a sport like wrestling. I think if there's one sport that's the most vulnerable, it is wrestling. Again, we've got a few months here to figure out some solutions. But we'll continue to follow the data. We'll continue to see what other levels of sport are doing and make decisions accordingly.
How, a lot of people are in a modified phase 2 with the governor's recent order. How do we get to when they get to phase 3, and when could, sports go indoors? When can that start, and what do you need to see for that to happen?
So what I would anticipate now, my wife is a fitness instructor. So she works in 3 different gyms. Spinning is kind of what her specialty is. Well, currently all of those facilities remain closed. Same way with, hair salons and barbershops and places like that. What we anticipate is at some point in the next week, 2 weeks, whatever that is, that gyms, health clubs, and fitness centers open, which then become the trigger for our school indoor facilities to open, gymnasiums, in indoor pool, for example. And then the biggest one right now is weight rooms. I would think that when it comes to indoors, what you'll see in health clubs and fitness clubs is maybe it's limits of 10, maybe it's limits of 20, with social distancing, to where in some cases equipment and machines may have to be moved to ensure 6 foot of distance. It might mean that in a lifting situation, I can only be lifting enough weight that I can easily handle. In other words, I can't have a spotter who's going to be closer than 6 feet to me. Therefore, I need to go lower weights and higher reps. So we could see once indoor facilities are open, it's going to be much smaller numbers than 100. And that's why I see our indoor activity starting with step 1, groups of 10 or less, or a similar number to that, really starting slow as we continue to build up. Because again, I think there's a lot more concern right now of indoor activity in an enclosed space than for folks to move outdoors. You have to remember, from the governor's order yesterday, she allows athletic practices and competitions as long as you can maintain social distancing amongst the players when possible. So I know, for example, this weekend, there will be travel baseball and softball tournaments held in the state of Michigan, to where they'll put the umpire behind the pitcher. They'll try and spread the catcher and the hitter out just enough to where they comply, and then leadoffs and those things. I can absolutely guarantee you that the entrepreneurs, the folks who are making a considerable amount of money having those activities, well, that was all allowed under the governor's order yesterday. So what we're really trying to do in the educational setting is try and ease back into activity here as safely as we can. Not just for the COVID concerns, but Casey, you've got to remember, our kids have been as inactive over the last 2.5 months as they have ever been during their life. I've got 3 teenagers that live in my own house. Yeah, they do push-ups and sit-ups and go for a run, but it has been way different. So if nothing else, we need to just get kids active and around each other again. So when we talk about safety, it's not just COVID, it's also making sure, because of course the mentality of a high school kid is I'm indestructible, and I've got to make up for lost time over the last 2 months. So I'm going to jump in at 1,000 miles an hour, and we've got to be smarter in that respect too.
Are you confident that we will have high school sports in Michigan? Because it's a concern that I was getting up there. You see, other places like Texas, you see Ohio, Indiana, all these other places. Many people around here, from the people that I've talked to, weren't as confident to say, we're not going to have fall sports. We're not going to have sports at all. Are you confident that we will have sports in the fall?
I believe so. Again, my crystal ball, if it really was working that well, I could probably predict a lot of other things that might happen this fall. But again, you have to look at colleges. Every single day in our state, you're hearing more and more Michigan colleges are bringing kids back on campus. Well, that's just not for class. That's in the dormitories. That's in the dining hall. You're hearing that the Michigan colleges are also planning to bring athletes back on campus in the fall. Again, they've got a lot more challenges than we do at the high school level, because those kids are living there, they're eating there. Everything they're doing is in close quarters. So no, as each week has gone by here, Casey, with seeing where our colleges are going, seeing that the government is beginning to ease more and more restrictions as we go. Restaurants now being able to be filled next week at a 50% capacity. Again, that number of 100 for gatherings outdoors. The first week of June, I think, is incredibly important, to where that really, it's really given me a sense of optimism. Again, we still need to do all the right things to continue to flatten this curve. But in a long rambling answer, Casey, yeah, I'm confident that we'll be able to have activity. We'll not only be able to have school in the fall, but also with that school sports activity as well.
Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on and in such short notice, of course, with the entire big announcement today. And I am sure we will be talking once again, probably next month, about whatever else, as many schools are going to probably prepare for fall sports in the next few months.
Sounds great, Casey. Stay safe, healthy, everybody.
All right.